Some people are born into violence. Others have it thrust upon them in a single moment that divides their life into before and after. I learned that truth on a Thursday night when blood spilled across white marble floors, and I had to choose between staying invisible or becoming someone I never imagined I could be. The Park Hyatt Hotel rose above Ashford City like a monument to wealth and power, all glass and steel and the kind of luxury that made ordinary people feel small just walking past its doors. I'd worked there for 8 months as a banquet server, invisible in my black uniform, carrying trays through rooms where deals worth millions were made over glasses of wine that cost more than my monthly rent. It was good work. Better than the 3 other jobs I'd cycled through since dropping out of college when my brother's cancer treatments ate through our family's savings. The tips were decent, the hours predictable, and nobody looked at me long enough to ask questions I didn't want to answer. That Thursday started like any other. I arrived for my shift at 5 in the evening, changed into my uniform in the staff locker room, and reported to the grand ballroom where some corporate event was being set up. Tables draped in silk, centerpieces that probably cost more than I made in a week, everything arranged with the kind of precision that suggested the people attending expected perfection as their baseline reality. But as I was arranging water glasses at the head table, I noticed something different. The security presence was heavier than usual, men in dark suits positioned at every entrance, their eyes constantly scanning the room with professional alertness. And in the corner, partially hidden behind a decorative column, I saw a man who made my breath catch in my throat. He was maybe 35, with dark hair that fell slightly across his forehead, and a face that belonged in old paintings, all sharp angles and intensity. He wore a tailored suit that probably cost more than my car, if I'd owned a car, and he moved with the kind of confidence that suggested he'd never doubted his right to occupy any space he entered. But it was his eyes that held me frozen. They were the palest gray I'd ever seen, like winter storms trapped in human form, and when they swept across the room, people instinctively moved out of their path. I recognized him from newspapers and hushed conversations among hotel staff. Weasley Grayson. The name carried weight in Ashford City, spoken with the kind of careful neutrality that meant people knew exactly who he was and what he represented. On paper, Weasley Grayson was a legitimate businessman, real estate developer, owner of half the commercial properties in downtown Ashford, philanthropist who donated generously to children's hospitals and art museums. But everyone knew the real story. Weasley Grayson controlled everything that mattered in this city, from the politicians who made the laws to the police who selectively enforced them. His empire was built on foundations that existed in shadows, on businesses that operated in gray areas where legality depended on who was asking the questions. He was dangerous, powerful, and according to rumors, absolutely ruthless when crossed. And he was here, in the Park Hyatt's ballroom, for reasons I couldn't begin to guess. I finished setting up my section and retreated to the service area where servers gathered before events started. The other staff were buzzing with nervous energy, whispering about the guest list and the security measures and what it all meant. Apparently, this wasn't a corporate event at all. It was a private dinner, invitation only, attended by the kind of people whose names appeared in business sections and police reports with equal frequency. A peace summit, one of the older servers whispered, his voice low. The 5 families that run different territories in Ashford. They're meeting to discuss boundaries, to prevent war from breaking out. And Grayson? I asked, keeping my tone carefully neutral. He's hosting. Trying to broker peace because open conflict is bad for everyone's business. The older server shook his head. But there are rumors that one of the families, the Volkov organization, isn't interested in peace, that they're planning something tonight. My stomach clenched with unease. If something was going to happen, if violence was planned for this evening, then everyone in this room was in danger. The smart thing would be to call in sick, to leave before the event started, to put as much distance between myself and whatever was coming as possible. But I needed this job, needed the money that kept my brother in treatment, kept our tiny apartment from being another thing we lost to his illness. So I stayed, telling myself that rumors were just rumors, that nothing would actually happen in a place as public as the Park Hyatt Hotel. I was wrong about that. Catastrophically, terribly wrong. The guests began arriving at 7, a parade of expensive suits and designer dresses, of people who moved through the world like they owned it because in many ways they did. I served drinks and appetizers with mechanical efficiency, keeping my head down and my face neutral, playing my role as the invisible help who saw nothing and remembered less. Weasley Grayson held court at the center table, flanked by men who had the look of professional security. But not enough security, I noticed. For someone as powerful as him, for an event this potentially volatile, he seemed almost casually protected. One man stood slightly behind Grayson's chair, broad-shouldered and alert, his eyes constantly moving. That would be his personal bodyguard, the last line of defense if something went wrong. But one bodyguard seemed insufficient, almost reckless, for a man with as many enemies as Weasley Grayson supposedly had. The dinner progressed with surface civility. Toasts were made, speeches given, agreements discussed in language so coded I couldn't begin to understand what was actually being negotiated. But I felt the tension in the room like a physical presence, saw it in the way certain guests watched each other with barely concealed hostility, in the forced smiles that never reached their eyes. Then, at exactly 9:15, the lights went out. Not a gradual dimming or a blown fuse. Every light in the ballroom died simultaneously, plunging 300 people into absolute darkness. For a second, there was confused silence. Then someone screamed, and chaos erupted like a bomb going off in slow motion. I dropped to the floor instinctively, my training from years of living in rough neighborhoods taking over before my conscious mind could process what was happening. Around me, I heard shouting, breaking glass, the sound of furniture being overturned. And underneath it all, a sound that made my blood freeze. Gunshots. 3 of them, sharp and distinct even in the chaos. When the emergency lights flickered on 30 seconds later, painting everything in sickly red, I saw a scene from a nightmare. The ballroom was in chaos, guests scrambling for exits, security trying to establish control. And at the center table, Weasley Grayson's bodyguard lay motionless on the floor, blood pooling beneath him. But Grayson himself was gone. I stayed low, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what I was seeing. The bodyguard, the man whose job was protecting Weasley Grayson, had failed, had either been killed or incapacitated in those first critical seconds of darkness. And now the most powerful man in Ashford City was somewhere in this chaos, unprotected, vulnerable to whoever had orchestrated this attack. The smart thing to do was stay down, stay safe, let the professionals handle this. But as I crouched behind an overturned table, I heard something that changed everything. A voice, tight with pain and forced calm, coming from near the service entrance to the kitchen. This way. Move quickly. I recognized that voice from the speeches earlier. Weasley Grayson trying to evacuate through the staff areas, away from the main exits where whoever had attacked him would be watching. And I heard something else. Footsteps, heavy and purposeful, moving through the chaos with the kind of direction that suggested these people knew exactly what they were looking for. Men speaking in clipped tones, coordinating a search. They'd find him. In the maze of service corridors and storage rooms, they'd eventually corner him. And without his bodyguard, without proper security, Weasley Grayson was as vulnerable as any other man facing armed killers. I should have stayed hidden, should have let events unfold without involving myself in the private wars of people who operated in worlds I didn't understand. But I thought about my brother, about being helpless while bad things happened, about the moments in life where you either act or live forever with the knowledge that you could have made a difference and chose safety instead. I stood up, my legs shaking, and moved toward the service entrance. The kitchen was a disaster. Staff huddled in corners or fled entirely, pots and pans scattered where they'd been dropped. I grabbed the first weapon I could find, a heavy cast iron skillet that had been soaking in one of the deep sinks. It was absurd, bringing a cooking implement to what was clearly a gunfight. But it was something, and having something in my hands made me feel fractionally less helpless. I followed the sound of those purposeful footsteps, moving through corridors I knew from 8 months of carrying trays and avoiding management. The men hunting Weasley Grayson were professionals, but they didn't know this building the way staff did. Didn't know about the service elevator that only worked if you held the button down for exactly 5 seconds, or the storage room that connected to 2 different corridors, or the narrow passage behind the industrial freezers that led to the loading dock. I knew this space. It was my territory in ways that mattered right now. I found them in the narrow hallway near the linen storage. 3 men, armed and moving with military precision, had cornered Weasley Grayson against a locked door. He was injured. I could see that immediately. Blood darkened his left shoulder, and he held that arm awkwardly against his body. But even wounded, even facing 3 armed men with nothing but his bare hands, he didn't look defeated. He looked furious. The lead man raised his weapon, and time seemed to slow down in that horrible way it does when everything terrible is about to become permanent. I didn't think. Didn't plan. Didn't consider consequences or alternatives, or whether what I was about to do would accomplish anything except getting myself killed. I just moved. The cast iron skillet connected with the lead gunman's skull with a sound like a hammer hitting wood. He went down hard, his weapon clattering across the linoleum floor. For a frozen second, everyone stared at me. This waitress in a service uniform who'd just assaulted an armed man with a piece of cookware. Then the second gunman turned his weapon toward me, and Weasley Grayson moved with liquid speed that shouldn't have been possible for an injured man. He grabbed the gunman's arm, redirecting the weapon's barrel toward the ceiling as it discharged. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space, making my ears ring. Then Grayson twisted, using the gunman's own momentum against him, sending him crashing into the wall with bone-breaking force. The third man was already running, abandoning his unconscious companion and injured partner, his footsteps echoing down the corridor as he fled. For a moment, silence. Then Weasley Grayson looked at me with those winter-gray eyes, and I saw something flicker across his face that might have been respect or might have been shock. "Who are you?" His voice was rougher than it had been during the speeches, strained with pain and exertion. "Coraline. I work here. I serve drinks and apparently hit people with kitchen equipment." I stared at the skillet still clutched in my trembling hands, barely believing what I'd just done. "Are you hurt?" "I've been shot before." Grayson pressed his good hand against his injured shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. "This isn't even in my top 5 worst injuries. But we need to move. Now. There will be more of them, and they won't make the mistake of underestimating their opposition twice." He bent to retrieve the fallen weapons with practiced efficiency, checking their ammunition with the kind of familiarity that suggested this wasn't his first time handling consequences of violence. Then he looked at me again, really looked at me, seeing past the uniform to something underneath. "You saved my life." "Why?" "I don't know," I admitted, the adrenaline starting to fade and leave me shaking. It seemed like the right thing to do in the moment. Most people would have hidden, would have let me die rather than risk themselves. Grayson moved closer, and I caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with blood and cordite. "You're either very brave or very foolish." "Maybe both," I said, surprised by my own steadiness. "Can you walk? Do we have a choice?" He had a point. We could hear more footsteps now, voices calling out in Russian, coordinating a systematic search of the service areas. The Volkov organization, I realized, remembering the older server's warning. They'd orchestrated this entire attack, used the peace summit as cover to eliminate their biggest rival. I took Weasley Grayson's uninjured arm, supporting some of his weight as we moved through the corridors I knew by heart. He was heavier than he looked, his body solid with muscle beneath the expensive suit, and I could feel tremors running through him that suggested the blood loss was more serious than he wanted to admit. "Where are we going?" he asked, his voice tight with controlled pain. "Loading dock. There's a service exit that connects to the parking garage. If we can reach your car, we might have a chance. I don't have a car here." I was supposed to leave through the front entrance after the dinner, protected by security that clearly failed to anticipate this level of attack. Grayson's voice carried bitter acknowledgement of betrayal. Someone inside my organization sold me out, gave the Volkovs the security protocols, the timing, everything they needed to execute this perfectly. "Then we steal a car," I said, making decisions on instinct rather than planning. "Because staying here isn't an option, and I'm not interested in finding out what happens to witnesses when the Volkov organization decides to eliminate loose ends." We reached the loading dock through a maintenance corridor that required climbing down a ladder with one hand while I supported Weasley Grayson's weight from below. It was awkward, painful, and took forever. But we made it, emerging into the cool night air of the loading area where delivery trucks came and went during normal business hours. The parking garage connected to the hotel through this dock, and I could see vehicles scattered across multiple levels. Most would have alarms, security systems designed to prevent exactly what we were planning. But hotel vehicles, the vans and cars used for guest services, those would be easier. I spotted a black sedan with Park Hyatt Hotel service stenciled discreetly on its side, keys probably in the ignition because staff were constantly moving these vehicles around. "Stay here," I told Grayson, helping him sit behind a dumpster where he'd be hidden from casual observation. "I'm going to get us transportation." "Coraline." He caught my wrist with his good hand, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who'd been shot. His gray eyes held mine with unsettling intensity. "If something happens, if they catch you, don't tell them anything about me. Don't sacrifice yourself for a stranger." "We're well past stranger status," I said, surprised by my own certainty. "I hit someone with a skillet for you. That creates a bond." His smile was brief but genuine, transforming his face into something almost boyish, despite the blood and violence. "Then hurry, because I don't think I can run anymore, and I'd rather not test whether they're willing to kill witnesses in public spaces." I left him hidden and moved toward the hotel service vehicle with as much confidence as I could fake. The loading dock at night was relatively quiet, just a couple of delivery people finishing late runs, nobody paying attention to another person in hotel uniform. The sedan's keys were indeed in the ignition, a violation of policy that I was suddenly grateful for. I started the engine, backed out of the parking space with what I hoped looked like authorized purpose, and pulled up next to the dumpster where Weasley Grayson waited. He climbed into the passenger seat with visible effort, his face pale and strained in the dashboard lights. As I drove toward the exit, trying to look casual despite my hammering heart, I saw them. 4 men in dark clothes, moving through the parking garage with purposeful direction, clearly searching for something. I kept my speed steady, resisting the urge to floor the accelerator and draw attention. We passed within 20 feet of them, close enough that I could see the weapons they carried concealed beneath their jackets. One of them glanced at our vehicle, his eyes passing over the hotel service markings without interest. We were invisible. Just another staff car on hotel business, too mundane to warrant suspicion. Until we reached the exit gate. The attendant, a young guy I'd seen around but never spoken to, looked at me with confusion. "Service vehicles don't usually leave this late. Do you have authorization?" Before I could respond, Weasley Grayson leaned forward slightly, and I saw the attendant's eyes widen with recognition. The gate rose immediately, no further questions asked. We pulled out onto the street, leaving the Park Hyatt Hotel behind, and I finally allowed myself to breathe. "Where are we going?" Grayson asked, his voice weaker now, the adrenaline clearly fading. "I have a safe house on the north side, but they'll expect me to go there. They'll have people watching all my known properties." "Then we go somewhere they won't expect," I said, making another decision that would change everything. "My apartment. It's small. It's in a neighborhood nobody would associate with you, and I have medical supplies. My brother has cancer. I've learned how to handle injuries." Weasley Grayson studied me in the darkness, city lights washing across his face in alternating patterns. "You're taking me to your home. A man you don't know, who brings violence wherever he goes, who will put you in danger just by being near you." "Yes," I said simply. "Because you need help, and I'm the only person you can trust right now." After a long moment, he nodded. "Then I accept your hospitality, Coraline, who works at the Park Hyatt Hotel and saves lives with kitchen equipment. And I will make sure you never regret showing me this kindness." It was a promise that sounded like a vow, delivered with the kind of absolute certainty that suggested Weasley Grayson always kept his word. I just hoped I'd live long enough to see whether that was true. We drove through Ashford City's streets in tense silence, me constantly checking the mirrors for signs of pursuit, Weasley Grayson growing paler and quieter with each passing minute. My apartment was in the Riverside district, 15 blocks from the gleaming towers of downtown in a neighborhood that had been working class for 3 generations. The building was old but maintained, its brick facade and fire escapes speaking of an era when places like this housed factory workers and their families. Now it housed people like me, struggling to keep their heads above water while the city grew more expensive around them. I parked the stolen hotel car 3 blocks away, in a spot where it wouldn't immediately draw attention. Weasley Grayson moved slowly as we walked, his injured arm tucked against his body, his expensive suit jacket doing little to hide the blood. But he moved, putting one foot in front of the other with determined focus, and I felt reluctant admiration for his refusal to show weakness. The stairs to my third-floor apartment felt endless. Each step seemed to cost him, but he climbed without complaint, his jaw clenched tight against pain he refused to vocalize. When we finally reached my door, when I unlocked it and helped him inside my tiny studio with its secondhand furniture and walls that needed painting, he looked around with an expression I couldn't read. "This is your home." "It's not much," I said, suddenly self-conscious about the contrast between this space and the world he inhabited. "But it's safe, it's clean, and nobody will think to look for you here. It's honest." Weasley Grayson settled carefully onto my couch, the only piece of furniture large enough to hold his frame. "That matters more than you might think." I retrieved my brother's medical supplies from the bathroom, the kit I'd assembled over months of learning how to change dressings and monitor infections. My hands shook as I gathered what I'd need, the reality of what I'd done finally catching up with me. I'd assaulted armed men, stolen a car, brought a crime lord to my apartment. Any one of those things could destroy my life if discovered. All of them together might get me killed. "I need to see the wound," I said, returning to the couch with my supplies. "Your jacket and shirt have to come off." Weasley Grayson unbuttoned his shirt one-handed, revealing a body that confirmed suspicions about how he maintained his power. Scars crisscrossed his chest and abdomen, old wounds that spoke of violence survived, of a life lived in constant proximity to danger. The gunshot wound in his shoulder was still bleeding, the bullet's entrance neat, but the surrounding tissue angry and swollen. I'd never actually treated a gunshot before, but I'd seen enough injuries from my brother's treatments to understand basics. Clean the wound, stop the bleeding, watch for signs of infection. I worked carefully, cleaning away blood with steady hands that surprised me given my internal panic. Weasley Grayson watched me work without speaking, his gray eyes tracking my movements with unnerving focus. "You've done this before," he observed. "Not exactly this, but my brother, James, he's had a lot of medical procedures. I've learned to handle needles and blood and wounds that won't quite heal." I applied pressure to slow the bleeding. "He's 17. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia. We're in our second year of treatment. I'm sorry." The words were simple but carried genuine feeling. That's a heavy burden for someone your age. "I'm 23. Old enough to handle whatever I need to handle," I said, surprised by the defensive edge in my tone. "And he's my brother. There's no burden in taking care of family." "Fair enough." Weasley Grayson winced as I probed the wound's edges, checking for bullet fragments. "But Coraline, saving me tonight, that wasn't taking care of family. That was a choice you didn't have to make." "Why did you?" I paused in my work, considering the question. "Because I've spent the last 2 years feeling helpless," I said finally. "Watching my brother suffer through treatments that might not work, watching our savings disappear, watching my mother work herself sick, trying to keep us afloat. Tonight, when I saw you in danger, when I had a chance to actually do something instead of just enduring, I couldn't walk away. Even though doing something meant attacking armed men with a skillet. Even though." I resumed cleaning the wound, my voice steadier now. "Besides, you were injured, outnumbered. It seemed unfair to let them kill you without at least making it difficult." Weasley Grayson's laugh was surprised and genuine. "Most people think fairness is irrelevant in my world, that survival is the only thing that matters. Don't those people get tired?" I met his eyes directly, holding his gaze. "Because I've been surviving for 2 years, and I'm exhausted. Surviving isn't living, it's just postponing death while you wait for things to get better." Something shifted in his expression, a recognition that went deeper than our current situation. "You understand more than most people who've lived twice as long, but Coraline, by helping me tonight, you've made yourself visible to people who eliminate problems rather than negotiating with them. The Volkov organization will hunt you now, not because you're important, but because you were a witness." Fear tried to claw its way up my throat, but I swallowed it down. "Then I guess I need protection. Do you know anyone who might be able to provide that?" His smile was sharp as broken glass. "I might know someone. But protection in my world comes with prices that aren't always obvious until you're already committed." "What kind of prices?" "Loyalty, secrecy, understanding that once you're inside my organization, leaving becomes complicated." Weasley Grayson watched me process this, his expression unreadable. "I don't make people choose that path lightly, Coraline, but you saved my life tonight. That creates obligations on both sides." I finished bandaging his shoulder, my hands moving with automatic efficiency while my mind raced ahead. "What are you offering?" "A job. A place in my organization where your particular combination of courage and medical knowledge would be valuable. Protection for you and your family from the Volkov organization and anyone else who might see you as leverage. And compensation that would allow your brother to receive the best cancer treatment available anywhere in the country." The offer was staggering in its scope. Everything I'd been struggling for handed to me on a silver platter wrapped in blood and moral ambiguity. "But nothing is free," I said, looking at him directly. "What would you want in return?" "Your loyalty. Your discretion. Your presence when I need someone I can trust absolutely." Weasley Grayson's voice was matter of fact. "I've learned tonight that people in my inner circle can be bought or intimidated, but someone who hits armed men with skillets for a stranger, someone who chooses action over safety, that's loyalty I can't purchase. You'd be buying it with medical treatment for my brother." The observation was pointed. "That's gratitude and obligation, not genuine loyalty. Isn't it?" He considered this. Fair point. Then let me offer something different. Work for me for 6 months. Learn what my world actually involves. See if you can stomach the reality beneath the luxury. If at the end of that time you want out, I'll ensure you and your family are relocated somewhere safe with enough money to live comfortably. No obligations, no strings attached. I studied Weasley Grayson, this dangerous man bleeding on my couch, offering me a way out of the poverty and struggle that had defined my recent existence. 6 months to decide if I could live in his world of violence and power. 6 months during which my brother would receive treatment that might actually save his life. 6 months that might transform me into someone I didn't recognize, or 6 months that might reveal who I'd always been beneath the fear and exhaustion. I accept, I said, the words feeling like jumping off a cliff without knowing what lay below. But I have conditions. Name them. My family doesn't get involved in your business. Whatever I do, whatever role I play in your organization, my mother and brother remain separate. They stay safe. Agreed. And if James needs me, if his treatment requires me to be there, that takes priority over whatever you need from me. Weasley Grayson extended his uninjured hand, his gray eyes holding mine with absolute focus. Agreed. But Coraline, understand that once we shake on this, you're mine to protect, and mine to command. I don't share loyalty, and I don't tolerate betrayal. Anyone who threatens you threatens me. That's the reality of accepting my protection. I took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin, the strength in his grip despite his injury. Then we have a deal. The handshake lasted longer than necessary, his eyes searching my face like he was memorizing features he expected to see transformed. When he finally released my hand, he settled back against the couch cushions with visible relief. Now that business is concluded, I should probably mention that I'm about to pass out from blood loss. Try not to steal my wallet while I'm unconscious. I grabbed a blanket from my closet, covering his frame with care. Your wallet is the least valuable thing in this room right now. That title belongs to my medical supplies and the last of my brother's prescribed medications. But I'll try to restrain my larcenous impulses. Weasley Grayson's eyes were already closing, exhaustion and blood loss overwhelming his determination to remain conscious. Coraline, he murmured, his voice fading. Thank you. For everything. You're welcome, I whispered to the room after his breathing had evened into sleep. And I'm sorry for whatever I'm about to become. I stayed awake through the night, watching Weasley Grayson sleep on my couch while monitoring his breathing and checking his wound for signs of infection. Outside my window, Ashford City continued its endless rhythm, unaware that on this particular Thursday night, a waitress had become something else entirely. The choice I'd made felt both inevitable and impossible, like I'd been moving toward this moment since my brother got sick and our family started drowning in medical debt. Or maybe longer, since my father left and my mother learned that protection was something you couldn't count on from other people. Weasley Grayson had offered me power dressed up as employment, protection disguised as gratitude, a chance to stop being helpless while my brother's illness consumed everything we touched. But underneath all those pragmatic reasons, I recognized something more fundamental. When I'd seen him cornered and injured, when I'd grabbed that skillet and made the choice to fight rather than hide, I'd felt more alive than I had in years. The fear, the adrenaline, the absolute clarity of purpose, it had cut through the fog of exhaustion and desperation that had become my normal state. For the first time since James got sick, I'd been more than his caretaker, more than our family's financial desperate measure, more than someone just trying to survive until tomorrow. I'd been powerful, and that feeling, terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, suggested that maybe Weasley Grayson's world wasn't something I was being forced into by circumstance. Maybe it was something I'd been looking for without knowing it, a place where my particular combination of fearlessness and desperation could be transformed into something that mattered. Dawn came slowly, painting my apartment in shades of gray that matched Weasley Grayson's eyes. He stirred as light touched his face, his features tightening with pain before awareness fully returned. When his eyes opened and found me sitting across from him, watching, something like relief flickered across his expression. "You're still here. Where else would I go? My apartment, my rules, remember?" I stood, moving to check his wound. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been shot," which is accurate. Weasley Grayson sat up carefully, testing his range of motion. "But alive, which I wouldn't be without your intervention. What happens now?" "Now I make some calls, arrange for proper medical attention, and deal with the considerable mess last night created." He pulled out his phone. The screen cracked, but functional. "But first, Coraline, I need you to understand something about the choice you made." "What's that?" "The people who attacked me last night, the Volkov organization, they won't stop because their first attempt failed. They'll come at me again, harder and more carefully. And now you're associated with me, which makes you a target." His expression was serious. "I can protect you, but I can't make you safe. Those are different things." "I know." I'd known it the moment I'd hit that gunman, had understood that crossing that line meant there was no going back to my previous life of relative invisibility. But Weasley, I was never really safe before. I was just unnoticed. And that's not the same thing. Being poor, being powerless, that's its own kind of danger. At least now I'm choosing the risks I take instead of having them imposed on me by circumstance. He studied me for a long moment, and I saw respect deepen into something more complex. "You're going to be formidable once you understand how power actually works in my world." "I already am formidable," I corrected him. "I just haven't had the resources to demonstrate it properly until now." Weasley Grayson's smile was genuine and slightly dangerous, the expression of someone recognizing an equal where he'd expected to find a subordinate. "Then, let's give you those resources and see what you become."